Rebecca didn't know the predator circling the Royal Library's restricted archives was the Alpha King himself. She only knew the sound of boots on ancient stone, deliberate, measured, like a wolf who had already tasted the air and found his prey. The blood moon cast crimson light through the vaulted windows, painting the towering shelves in shades of rust and shadow. The scent of leather-bound histories and forbidden texts hung thick in the air. Her pulse thundered so violently she was certain every wolf in the kingdom could hear it. She pressed herself against the cold mahogany behind the genealogy section, her fingers clutching the scroll she had no business touching. 6 months of invisible work, 6 months of reorganizing, cataloging, existing in the spaces between notice, waiting for the night she could finally see the records they'd hidden from Omegas like her. The Maid Council's original decrees, the ones that proved bonding laws, had been rewritten to serve power, not fate. And tonight, on the very night she'd finally slipped past the enchanted locks, someone else had entered the archives. The footsteps stopped. Rebecca held her breath, her Omega instincts screaming 2 contradictory commands. Run and submit. Through the narrow gap between gilded spines, she glimpsed him at the corridor's end. Tall, powerfully built, cloaked in midnight fabric that seemed to drink the moonlight. His face remained hidden in shadow, but his head tilted slightly, listening, hunting, knowing. Then he moved. Not toward the exit, not away from danger, directly toward the genealogy section. Her hands trembled against the scroll. She couldn't be discovered. Not now. Not when she'd finally found proof that Omegas had once chosen their own mates before the council twisted the moon's law into chains. Rebecca dropped low, crawling beneath the bottom shelf into the next aisle. Dust filled her lungs. Her plain night dress snagged on a protruding nail, and she wrenched it free. The small, ripping sound cut through the silence like a blade. The footsteps shifted immediately, tracking her with predatory precision. She abandoned stealth entirely and ran, her bare feet silent against the worn stone as she wove between the massive shelves, deeper into the archive's heart, past the territorial maps, through the warfare chronicles, into the oldest wing where the air grew colder and the shelves pressed closer together, where even the moonlight seemed afraid to follow. His pursuit never rushed, never faltered, always 3 steps behind, always anticipating her turns, as if he could taste her panic on the air. Dead end. Rebecca spun, her back hitting the wall of crumbling texts. The restricted bloodline records loomed above her, centuries of alpha lineages that no Omega was permitted to read. There was nowhere left to run. She could hear him approaching, each footfall a countdown to discovery, to punishment, to the end of everything she dared to hope for. Rebecca did the only thing she'd ever learned to do when the world grew too large and too cruel. She made herself smaller. Squeezing into the narrow gap between the final shelf and the corner, she pulled her knees to her chest, clutching the stolen scroll against her heart. The shadows here were absolute. The blood moon's light didn't penetrate this far into the archives, but she could feel him getting closer, smell leather and night air and something wild, something that made her wolf whimper and keen despite her fear. Then a gloved hand reached into the darkness between the shelves. A book slid aside, and amber gold eyes, ancient, furious, impossibly beautiful, ignited the dark like twin flames. The air turned to electricity. Her skin prickled with recognition she didn't understand. Something deep in her chest pulled, like an invisible thread, suddenly drawn taut. The stranger staggered backward as if struck. "No," he breathed, the single word carved from shock and denial. "That's not possible." Rebecca's voice came out broken, automatic, conditioned by years of apologizing for existing. I'm sorry, my lord. I didn't mean to be here." But the stranger was no longer listening. His wolf was roaring beneath his skin, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped to a stunned, reverent whisper that would shatter everything Rebecca thought she knew about her invisible life. "You're my chosen mate. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in." Chapter 2. The Unmated King. Philibert had walked through fire, survived assassination attempts, and stared down rebel alphas without flinching. But nothing had prepared him for the feeling of a mate bond snapping into place with a terrified Omega, clutching forbidden scrolls in the darkest corner of his own library. His wolf howled triumph and possession, a primal sound that reverberated through his bones. Mine, ours, protect, claim. He forced himself back another step, fighting the urge to reach for her, to pull her into his arms and never let go. This was impossible. He was the unmated king, the wolf cursed by the moon herself to rule alone. 28 years without a bond, without even a whisper of recognition from any Omega, Beta, or Alpha in his kingdom. The Mate Council had declared him broken, incomplete, a king whose bloodline would end with him. And yet here she was, small, trembling, smelling of old books and moonflowers and something uniquely her. A scent so subtle he understood immediately why no one had ever noticed her before. She had no rank markers, no family scent layered into her skin, no perfume or oils meant to attract. She was invisible by design, or perhaps by survival. "Please don't punish me," she whispered, still pressed against the shelves like she could disappear into them. "I'll put everything back. I swear I won't tell anyone what I read." "You think I'm here to punish you?" The words came out harsher than he intended, his wolf still raging beneath his control. She flinched, and something in his chest cracked. Philibert had spent 3 years patrolling his kingdom in disguise, searching for the truths his council hid from him. He'd discovered corruption, abuse, laws twisted to serve the powerful while the vulnerable suffered in silence. Tonight, he'd followed an unusual magical signature to the archives, expecting to find a spy or a thief. Instead, he'd found his mate stealing proof of the council's lies. His wolf approved. He noticed her shaking, then full-body tremors that had nothing to do with cold. The archives were temperature-controlled by ancient magic. She was afraid. Of him. Of discovery. Of whatever punishment she believed she deserved for daring to seek truth. Without thinking, Philibert unclasped his traveling cloak and draped it over her shoulders. She gasped at the gesture, her wide eyes dough-brown and luminous in the darkness lifting to his face for the first time. "You don't have to disappear," he said quietly, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. I don't understand." Her fingers clutched the edges of his cloak, the fabric swallowing her small frame. "You're Philibert," he supplied. "And you are?" She blinked, confusion rippling across her delicate features. "Rebecca, Rebecca," he repeated, testing the name, letting it settle into his consciousness like a truth he'd been waiting his whole life to learn. "Have you worked in the Royal Library long?" "6 months, my lord." "Night archivist." She said it like a confession. Nobody notices the night shift. Nobody had noticed her. The realization made his wolf snarl with protective fury. "I notice," Philibert said. The bond pulsed between them, warm and insistent, and he watched her eyes widen as she felt it too, that invisible thread pulling them together, defying every law the Mate Council had ever written. "This can't be real," Rebecca breathed. "The Alpha King can't bond with someone like me." "Someone like you?" He crouched down to her level, careful to maintain distance even as every instinct screamed at him to eliminate the space between them. "Someone brave enough to seek forbidden knowledge. Someone the moon chose. Someone invisible," she corrected, her voice breaking. "Someone without rank or family or value. Don't." The command came out rougher than intended. "Don't ever say you have no value." She stared at him, and he saw it then, the learned helplessness, the years of being overlooked and dismissed, the belief that her existence was something to apologize for. His wolf wanted to hunt down everyone who'd made her feel that way. But Philibert knew the greatest threat wasn't individual cruelty. It was the system, the Mate Council, the laws that treated Omegas like property to be distributed for political gain. And now, those same laws would be turned against Rebecca the moment the Council learned of their bond. "I need to get you somewhere safe," he said, rising to his full height. "The restricted wing has surveillance enchantments. When they review tonight's records, they'll see me," Rebecca finished, horror dawning on her face. They'll see us. They'll see a bond forming, Philibert confirmed. And they will do everything in their power to break it. He extended his hand to her, an offer, not a command. Rebecca hesitated, then placed her small hand in his. The bond blazed gold between them, visible for a heartbeat before fading back to that invisible pull. "I won't claim you," Philibert said as he helped her to her feet. "Not until you're ready. Not until you choose it freely. But I will protect you. That is not negotiable." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of it. "You're not forcing this." "Never," he swore. "The council may deal in commanded bonds, but I will not." He was still holding her hand when the magical alert chimed through the archives, 3 crystalline notes that meant one thing. The Mate Council's detection wards had been triggered. Rebecca's face went pale. "What does that mean?" Philibert's jaw tightened as he heard the distant sound of the council chambers awakening, magical signatures flaring to life across the castle. "It means," he said grimly, "they know." Chapter 3. A bond the council will break. The council chamber reeked of ancient power and older prejudice. Rebecca sat in a hard wooden chair, the only chair without cushions, without arms, positioned deliberately lower than the 7 council members who loomed above her on their elevated platform. She kept her eyes down, her hands folded in her lap, making herself small in the way she'd perfected over 23 years of invisible existence. "State your full name and rank." Councillor Margrave's voice dripped with contempt, barely concealed behind formal protocol. "Rebecca Thorne, my lord. No rank. Omega class. Family backing. None, my lord. Orphaned at 6. Scent designation? Unmarked, my lord." She heard the scratch of quills on parchment, documenting her worthlessness in official record. "And yet," Councillor Voss leaned forward, her sharp features twisted with suspicion, "you expect us to believe the Alpha King's mate bond activated for you?" "I don't expect anything, my lady." Rebecca's voice remained steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "I didn't ask for this." "Convenient," Margrave sneered. "An Omega with access to the restricted archives, suddenly bonding with the most powerful Alpha in the kingdom. Tell me, Miss Thorne, what enchantments did you use?" "I used nothing. Lies." Voss slammed her hand on the marble desk. "The Mate Council has governed bonding law for 3 centuries. We decide matches based on bloodline compatibility, political alliance, and territorial strength. The moon does not simply choose a nobody, but it had." Rebecca had felt it, that blazing golden thread that connected her to Philibert with a certainty that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The chamber doors opened. Philibert entered, no longer in his traveling cloak, but dressed in full royal regalia, midnight blue tunic, embroidered with silver wolves, the crown of moonfall resting on his dark hair. He looked every inch the king. He didn't look at Rebecca. "Your Majesty," Margrave rose, bowing with exaggerated deference. "We were just questioning the Omega about last night's incident." "There was no incident." Philibert's voice was ice and authority. "I was conducting a routine security patrol of the archives. Miss Thorne was performing her duties. The detection wards malfunctioned." Rebecca's heart plummeted. "A malfunction?" Voss's eyes narrowed. "The wards have never—" "They are 300 years old," Philibert interrupted. "Perhaps the council should focus less on baseless accusations and more on maintaining our infrastructure." "Your Majesty, with respect, we all felt the bond signature. You felt nothing. Each word fell like a blade. There is no bond. The wards malfunctioned. This matter is closed." He was denying it. Publicly, completely, he was denying their bond existed. Rebecca understood why she wasn't naive. He was buying them time, protecting her from immediate council action. But the words still cut deeper than she'd expected. "The council will, of course, defer to your wisdom, Your Majesty," Margrave said with barely concealed skepticism. "However, protocol demands we conduct a thorough evaluation for the Omega's own protection, naturally." "Naturally," Philibert agreed, his tone suggesting he found nothing natural about it. "You have 3 days. Then I expect this matter resolved, and Miss Thorne returned to her duties unmolested." He turned to leave, still without meeting her eyes. "Your Majesty," Rebecca found herself saying, her voice small but steady. "Thank you." For just a heartbeat, his steps faltered. Then he was gone. The knock on her temporary chamber door came near midnight. Rebecca had been moved to the Omega Wing, a gilded cage where unmated Omegas awaited council assignment. Her room was nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived, and she hated every inch of it. "It's me," Philibert's voice came through the wood. "May I enter?" "May I?" Not a command, a request. She opened the door to find him in simple clothes, the crown gone, his hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. "I had to deny it," he said immediately. "In front of the council." "I know." Rebecca stepped aside to let him enter. "I understand." He looked around the room at the enchanted locks on the windows, the monitoring crystals in the corners, the luxury that doubled as a prison. His jaw tightened. "I brought food." He set a basket on the small table by the window. "I wasn't sure if they'd fed you." They had. Perfectly adequate portions, served with cold politeness. But Rebecca found herself sitting across from him anyway, watching as he lit the candles with a small flame from his fingertips, as he unpacked bread and cheese and fruit with careful, deliberate movements. "You read the genealogy records," Philibert said quietly. "What did you find?" Rebecca hesitated, then pulled the scroll from where she'd hidden it in her dress. The original bonding laws, before the council rewrote them. His eyes blazed with interest. "And Omegas chose," she whispered. "The moon would call to both parties, but the Omega had to accept the bond willingly. It was sacred, equal. The council erased that. They made us property." "That's what I've suspected." Philibert leaned forward, candlelight playing across his features. "For 3 years, I've been searching for proof. The council buries anything that threatens their power." "Why?" Rebecca asked. "You're the king. Can't you just change the laws?" "The Mate Council predates the throne," he admitted. "They claim authority, granted directly by the moon, to challenge them without proof." He trailed off, frustration evident in every line of his body. "Is to risk civil war," Rebecca finished. Yes, they sat in silence, the weight of impossible odds settling between them. "I loved forgotten histories," Rebecca said softly. "Old stories where overlooked girls were chosen by fate. I never thought." She laughed, bitter and small. "I never thought I'd become one." "You're not overlooked anymore," Philibert said, his voice rough with something beyond simple attraction. "I see you, Rebecca." Their eyes met across the candlelight. "I see you too," she whispered. "Not the king, not the crown, just you." Something passed between them, then recognition deeper than the bond, more fundamental than magic. Two people who'd spent their lives searching for truth in a world built on lies. Philibert reached across the table, palm up. Rebecca placed her hand in his. The bond hummed contentment. The summons came at dawn. Rebecca stood before the council once more, her brief hours of peace shattered by 7 grim faces and a decision already made. "The May Council has voted unanimously," Margrave announced. "You will be separated from His Majesty for a period of evaluation. 6 months in the Southern Territories, where distance will prove whether this attachment is genuine or manufactured." 6 months? The words escaped before Rebecca could stop them. "Unless," Voss added with a cruel smile, "His Majesty wishes to publicly acknowledge the bond and submit to our judgment." It was a trap. Acknowledge the bond, and the council could legally dissolve it under corruption charges. Deny it, and Rebecca would be sent away. She looked at Philibert, standing rigid beside the throne. 6 months, he agreed, his voice empty. "For evaluation." Rebecca's world tilted. "The Omega departs at nightfall," Margrave declared. "Council dismissed." Chapter 4. Touch without claim. The guarded chambers were a pretty name for a cell. Rebecca stood at the window of the tower room, watching the southern road where a carriage would come for her at dusk. The guards outside her door weren't there for her protection, they were there to ensure she didn't run. Below, servants whispered as they passed, their voices carrying on the wind. Unnatural, an Omega like that. Trapped him with dark magic. Obviously. Should be expelled, not housed like a guest. Rebecca pressed her forehead against the cool glass. 6 more hours. Then she'd be gone, and Philibert could rule without the scandal of an invisible Omega threatening his throne. It was better this way. She almost believed it. The lock clicked. Rebecca spun, expecting a guard with her meager dinner. Instead, Philibert slipped through the door, closing it quietly behind him. He wore a servant's cloak. The hood pulled low. "You shouldn't be here," she said immediately. "If the council finds out, they're in session for another 3 hours." He pushed back the hood, and Rebecca's breath caught at the exhaustion carved into his features. "I needed to see you before." He didn't finish. "Before they send me away," Rebecca completed. Philibert crossed the room in 3 strides, then stopped abruptly, his hands clenching at his sides. "May I? Can I touch you?" The question stunned her into silence. "You don't have to ask permission," she finally managed. The bond doesn't give me rights to your body." His amber eyes burned with intensity. "You're not my property, Rebecca. You never will be. So I'm asking, may I hold you?" Something cracked open in her chest, something that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. "Yes," she whispered. He gathered her into his arms with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. His scent, pine and night air, and something wild wrapped around her like safety itself. The bond sang between them, and for a moment, Rebecca let herself imagine a world where this was allowed. "I won't let them keep you in the South for 6 months," Philibert murmured against her hair. "I'm working on something. A legal challenge to the council's authority. Just give me time." Glass shattered. Philibert spun, shoving Rebecca behind him as a figure in black crashed through the window in an explosion of moonlight and violence. The assassin's blade flashed silver. Everything happened too fast. The knife found flesh Philibert's left shoulder. He roared, his wolf surging forward as he caught the assassin's wrist and twisted. Bone snapped. The attacker crumpled, unconscious before hitting the floor. Guards burst through the door, weapons drawn. "Secure the prisoner," Philibert commanded, his voice steady despite the blood blooming across his shirt, "and find out who sent him." Then his knees buckled. "Philibert!" Rebecca caught him, or tried to. He was twice her size and solid muscle. They went down together, his weight pressing her against the wall. "Wolfsbane," he gritted out. On the blade, horror flooded through her. Wolfsbane, the poison that could kill an alpha, if not treated immediately. "Get the healers!" Rebecca screamed at the frozen guards. "No time." Philibert gasped. His skin was burning. "It's already in my bloodstream." Rebecca's hands shook as she tore open his shirt. The wound wasn't deep, but the edges were already turning black. She'd read about this, about how wolfsbane attacked the connection between human and wolf, driving them to madness before death. Philibert's eyes were flickering between amber and pure gold, his wolf fighting for control. "Rebecca, you need to leave," he managed. "When I lose control, I'm not leaving you." She pressed her hands over the wound, and her Omega instincts took over. Her scent flooded the space moonflowers and old books and something uniquely hers, something that made Philibert's thrashing still. His wolf, fighting the poison with feral rage, suddenly quieted. "What?" Philibert breathed. Rebecca didn't understand it either. She just knew that her presence was calming him, that her scent was somehow anchoring his wolf, keeping him from tearing apart from the inside. The healers arrived in a flurry of magical energy and herbal compounds, but even they stopped short. His wolf should be completely feral by now. The head healer whispered, staring at Rebecca with something like awe. "What are you doing?" "I don't know," Rebecca admitted, her hands still pressed to Philibert's chest. I won't let him go." It took an hour to extract the poison, an hour where Rebecca stayed pressed against Philibert's side, her Omega presence the only thing keeping his wolf from ripping free. By the end, both healers were studying her with unconcealed fascination. "I've never seen an Omega anchor an Alpha like that," the younger healer murmured. "Not without a completed bond." "Natural compatibility," the head healer replied. "Extraordinary." Rebecca barely heard them. She was watching Philibert's face as color slowly returned to his features, as his breathing steadied, as his eyes finally cleared. "You saved me," he said hoarsely. "You saved me first," she reminded him. "The assassin came through my window." His expression darkened. "They weren't trying to kill you. They were trying to kill me while I was with you. To make it look like I arranged it," Rebecca finished, nausea churning in her stomach. After the healers left, after the guards secured every window and door, Rebecca heard them whispering outside her chamber. "See, she's dangerous. Nearly got the king killed. Should have been expelled the moment the bond was suspected. He's been weakened ever since she arrived." Rebecca closed her eyes against the truth of it. They were right. Before her, Philibert had been the untouchable, unmated king. Now he was vulnerable, distracted, fighting battles on too many fronts. The assassination attempt proved the council or someone working with them would rather see him dead than bonded to an unranked Omega. She was his weakness, and if she stayed, she would get him killed. Rebecca looked at Philibert, sleeping fitfully on her bed where the healers had insisted he rest. She'd saved him tonight, but how many more attempts would there be? How many more times could she anchor his wolf before their enemies found a poison that worked faster? The Southern Territories weren't a punishment. They were her chance to save his life. Rebecca began to pack. Chapter 5. The Omega Who Walked Away. Rebecca moved through the pre-dawn darkness like a ghost. Her belongings fit into a single worn satchel, a few changes of clothes, the forbidden scroll she couldn't bear to leave behind, and a small wooden wolf Philibert had carved for her during one of their secret meetings. She touched it once, memorizing the rough edges where his knife had shaped the wood, then buried it at the bottom of the bag. The carriage wasn't scheduled until dusk, but she couldn't wait that long, couldn't risk him waking, couldn't endure another conversation where he promised to fix the unfixable. She was reaching for the door when his voice cut through the silence. "You're leaving early." Rebecca's hand froze on the handle. She turned to find Philibert sitting up in the chair by the window, his wounded shoulder bandaged but his eyes fully alert. He'd been awake the entire time, watching her pack in silence. "The council wants me gone," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'm just expediting their wishes. Don't lie to me." He rose, and even injured, he was devastating power and barely controlled fury radiating from every line of his body. "You're not leaving because of the council. You're running. I'm saving your life," Rebecca corrected, her own anger finally breaking through. "They tried to kill you last night. Because of me. Because the council is corrupt and terrified of losing control," Philibert interrupted, crossing the room in 3 strides. "None of this is your fault." "Isn't it?" She laughed, bitter and broken. "Before me, you were invincible, the unmated king, untouchable. Now you're weakened, distracted, fighting battles you shouldn't have to fight. I heard what they said outside. I don't care what they said." "Well, I do." The words exploded from her. "I care that you nearly died with my scent on your skin. I care that every moment I stay makes you more vulnerable. I care that loving you might be what destroys you." The confession hung between them, raw and devastating. Philibert went utterly still. "Loving me?" Rebecca's cheeks burned, but she didn't take it back. "I won't be the reason they destroy you, Philibert. I won't watch you choose between me and your kingdom. So I'm choosing for us. I'm leaving. No." The word came out low and dangerous, vibrating with an authority that made her Omega instincts scream submission. "You're not. You can't command me to stay. Can't I?" His eyes flashed pure gold, his alpha dominance rolling over her in waves. The air itself seemed to thicken with power, pressing down on her shoulders, demanding she kneel, submit, obey. Rebecca's knees trembled. Her wolf whimpered, desperate to yield to her mate's will. But beneath the instinct to submit was something stronger. The same stubborn resilience that had kept her alive through years of invisibility, through nights of hunger, through a lifetime of being overlooked. She lifted her chin and met his eyes. "You won't," she said quietly, "because you're not them. You don't command bonds. You don't force submission. You asked permission to hold me, remember?" The dominance shattered. Philibert staggered back like she'd struck him, horror washing over his features as he realized what he'd almost done. His hands shook as he pressed them against the wall, his breathing ragged. "Rebecca, I'm sorry. I didn't mean," his voice cracked. "I would never. I know." And she did. That's what made leaving so much harder. You stopped yourself. You always stop yourself. But what happens when the next assassin comes? What happens when the council demands you choose between the bond and the crown? What happens when loving me finally costs you everything? "Then I'll pay it," Philibert said fiercely, turning back to face her. "Every cost, every consequence. I don't care. I do." Rebecca picked up her satchel, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed. "I care enough for both of us." She moved toward the door. "Rebecca, please." His voice broke on her name. "Don't do this." She paused, her hand on the handle, drinking in the sight of him one last time, this powerful, broken king who'd seen her when the rest of the world had looked away. "I'm not strong enough to watch you die for me," she whispered. "So I'm being strong enough to walk away." "The bond," he started. "Will survive 6 months of distance," Rebecca finished. "But you might not survive 6 more days with me here. Goodbye, Philibert." She opened the door and walked through it. Each step away from him felt like tearing out her own heart. The bond stretched between them, pulling tighter and tighter until the pain was nearly unbearable. She heard him call her name once more, heard the anguish in it, and forced herself to keep walking. The guards at the tower entrance barely glanced at her as she passed just another invisible Omega leaving before dawn. Rebecca made it to the servants' gate, through the outer courtyard, halfway down the hill before the bond began screaming in true agony. She pressed her hand against her chest, gasping against the phantom wound of separation, but she didn't stop. The forest road was empty in the grey dawn light. Moonfall Castle rose behind her, its towers piercing the sky like accusations. She'd left everything she'd ever wanted behind those walls, but he would live. That had to be enough. Rebecca was so focused on the pain radiating through the bond that she didn't hear the horses until they were upon her. 6 riders in unmarked armor surrounded her, their faces hidden behind steel masks. She tried to run, but an Omega's speed was nothing against trained warriors. A cloth pressed over her mouth, sharp chemical scent flooding her senses. Her last conscious thought was of amber eyes and a half-carved wooden wolf. Then darkness swallowed everything. When Philibert felt the bond flare with terror and then go sickeningly quiet, he was halfway through demolishing his private chambers in rage and grief. He froze, his fist buried in the wall, as ice flooded his veins. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. "Captain!" he roared, already moving. "Assemble the guard, now." But even as his wolf howled for his mate, Philibert knew with terrible certainty he was already too late. Chapter 6. Jews. The message arrived at noon, delivered by a rider wearing the crimson sash of House Blackthorn, a rival alpha family that had contested the throne for 3 generations. Philibert read it once, twice, then crushed the parchment in his fist as his wolf howled for blood. "Your Majesty." Captain Thorne stood at attention, his weathered face carefully neutral. "What are your orders?" "Summon the Maid Council," Philibert said, his voice deadly calm. Immediately, within the hour, all 7 council members sat before him in the throne room, their expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed satisfaction. Philibert noticed Councillor Margrave's smug smile and filed it away for later justice. "It appears," Philibert began, each word precisely controlled, "that the Omega Rebecca Thorne was abducted this morning by agents of House Blackthorn. They're holding her at the Ironwood Fortress." "Terrible news," Voss said with theatrical sympathy, though perhaps not entirely unexpected. The girl was always a security risk. They're demanding I abdicate the throne. Philibert's voice cut through her false concern like a blade. In exchange for her life. Silence fell over the chamber. This is precisely why the Mate Council exists, Margrave said smoothly. Emotional attachments weaken kings, make them vulnerable to exactly this sort of manipulation. You knew. Philibert descended from the throne, his alpha presence flooding the room with suffocating pressure. You knew they would take her. Margrave's composure cracked for just a moment. Your Majesty, I assure you, don't. Philibert stopped inches from the councillor, his eyes blazing gold. Don't insult me with lies. You've been in contact with Blackthorn since the bond was detected. You told them exactly when she'd be most vulnerable. This entire evaluation was designed to isolate her. Speculation, Voss interjected, though she'd gone pale. You have no proof. I have your correspondence. Captain Thorne stepped forward, dropping a leather folder onto the council table, intercepted from a courier 2 hours ago, detailing the abduction timeline, the meeting points, even the chemical compound used to subdue her. The room erupted. This is treason, Councillor Wren shouted, backing away from Margrave and Voss. We had no part in this. Silence! Philibert's command shook the walls. House Blackthorn has issued a public demand. In 3 hours, every Alpha, Beta, and Omega in this kingdom will know I must choose. Relinquish my throne and save an unranked Omega, or keep my crown and let her die. Then the choice is obvious, Margrave said coldly. One Omega's life cannot be worth. The councillor's words ended in a choked gasp as Philibert's hand closed around his throat, lifting him off his feet. She is not one Omega, Philibert snarled, his wolf fully present in his voice. She is my mate, chosen by the moon, chosen by me, and you, all of you, conspired to tear us apart, because you value power over fate itself. He released Margrave, letting him collapse, gasping to the floor. Captain Thorne, arrest Councillors Margrave and Voss for treason. The rest of you are suspended from duty pending investigation. Philibert turned back toward the throne, his decision already made. I'm going to Ironwood Fortress. Your Majesty, you can't, Wren protested. It's obviously a trap. They'll kill you the moment you arrive. I'm aware. Then take the army, Captain Thorne urged. We can mobilize 500 warriors within the hour. No. Philibert began removing his ceremonial regalia, the crown, the formal robes, the symbols of his authority. Beneath, he wore simple combat leathers. Blackthorn's message was clear. I come alone, or Rebecca dies before I reach the gates. This is madness, Voss hissed from where guards restrained her. You're throwing away 3 centuries of moonfall rule for a nobody Omega. She's not nobody, Philibert strapped on his weapons with practiced efficiency. She's the woman who saved my life, who challenged corrupt laws, who walked away to protect me even though it destroyed her. He met each council member's eyes in turn. She's braver than any of you have ever been. Captain Thorne stepped forward, his expression grim. If you're determined to do this, at least let me come with you. I need you here, old friend. Philibert clasped the captain's shoulder. When if I don't return, you'll need to secure the kingdom. There are documents in my chambers detailing everything. Proof of the council's corruption, plans for legal reform, names of allies who can help you rebuild. You're talking like you're not coming back. I'm talking like a king who finally understands what matters. Philibert smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. For 28 years, I believed my curse was never bonding. I was wrong. My curse was waiting so long to find her that I'd have to lose everything to keep her. The kingdom needs you. The kingdom needs someone who will fight for justice, even when it's inconvenient. Someone who values truth over tradition. Philibert headed for the door, then paused. Rebecca taught me that. If I survive this, I'll spend my life proving she was right. If I don't, he looked back one last time. Tell her I chose her, without hesitation, without regret. The ride to Ironwood Fortress took 2 hours. Philibert felt the bond the entire way, weak but present, like Rebecca was unconscious but alive. He clung to that thread of connection, letting it guide him through familiar territory that suddenly felt foreign. House Blackthorn's stronghold rose from the forest like an iron fang, its walls bristling with archers and its gates sealed tight. Philibert dismounted 100 yards from the entrance, his hands deliberately visible and empty. The gates opened. Alpha Blackthorn himself emerged, a mountain of a man with steel-grey hair and cold blue eyes. Behind him, warriors lined the ramparts, their arrows trained on Philibert's heart. "The unmated king," Blackthorn called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Or should I say, the mated king? How the mighty have fallen. Where is she?" Philibert demanded. Blackthorn smiled and gestured behind him. They dragged Rebecca into view. She was conscious now, her wrists bound, her dress torn and dirty. But her eyes, those defiant brown eyes, found his immediately. Even terrified and captive, she shook her head at him, silently begging him to leave. Philibert's wolf roared. "The terms are simple," Blackthorn announced. "Kneel, publicly renounce your throne, and maybe I'll let your little Omega live. And if I refuse?" Blackthorn drew his sword and pressed it against Rebecca's throat. "Then she dies first," he said pleasantly. "Followed by you, followed by every reform-minded fool in Moonfall who thought an Omega could matter." Philibert looked at Rebecca, his mate, his equal, his choice. Then he began walking forward. "I, Philibert, Alpha King of Moonfall," he started. "No!" Rebecca's scream tore through the air. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare give up everything for me! Choose her," Philibert finished, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "Now let her go, and you can have whatever you want. The throne, the kingdom, all of it." Blackthorn's smile widened. "How disappointing. I'd hoped you'd have more fight in you." "Oh, I'm going to fight," Philibert promised softly. "Just not the way you expect." He kept walking until he stood before the fortress gates, alone and unarmed. "Bring the execution platform," Blackthorn ordered. "Let's make this official." Chapter 7. The moon answers her. They forced Rebecca to her knees on the execution platform. The wood was old, stained dark with the blood of previous traitors and enemies. Rebecca's bound wrists trembled against her thighs, but she kept her spine straight, her chin lifted. If she was going to die, she would die like she'd finally learned to live seen. Around the fortress courtyard, Blackthorn's warriors gathered, their faces eager for the spectacle. Above, the afternoon sun began its descent toward evening, and Rebecca wondered distantly if she would live to see moonrise. "Any last words, little Omega?" Blackthorn stood beside the executioner, his smile cruel and satisfied. Rebecca looked past him to where Philibert stood surrounded by guards, his weapons confiscated, his hands bound. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and the bond stretched thin and aching, pulsed with shared grief. "I'm sorry," she called to him. "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stay away." "Don't," his voice carried across the space between them, raw with emotion. "Don't apologize for being everything I never knew I needed." "How touching," Blackthorn sneered. "The king reduced to poetry for an unranked nobody. This is what happens when you let sentiment corrupt strength." He raised his hand, signaling the executioner. "The Mate Council was right to fear this bond. It's made you weak, Philibert. And weakness," the executioner raised his blade, "deserves death." Everything happened in a heartbeat. Philibert moved. The ropes binding his wrists fell away, cut by a hidden blade he'd somehow concealed. He was on the nearest guard before anyone could react, disarming the man with brutal efficiency and spinning to throw the sword across the courtyard. The blade embedded itself in the executioner's chest. He fell, dead, before he hit the platform. Chaos erupted. Philibert fought like a creature possessed, like a mated alpha whose bond was threatened, which was infinitely more dangerous. His wolf had taken over, turning him into something feral and unstoppable. He tore through Blackthorn's warriors with savage precision, each movement calculated to bring him closer to Rebecca. Blood painted the courtyard stones. "Kill him!" Blackthorn roared. "Kill them both!" Arrows flew. Philibert dodged, twisted, never stopping his advance. One arrow grazed his shoulder, another caught his thigh. He didn't slow down. Rebecca watched in horror and awe as he carved a path of destruction toward her, his golden eyes never leaving her face. "Rebecca!" He was 10 feet away now, fighting 3 warriors at once. "The bond, use the bond." "I don't know how." "Yes, you do." He disarmed another attacker. "You anchored my wolf during the poisoning. Do it again." "Pull." Rebecca didn't understand, but she closed her eyes and reached for that golden thread connecting them. She'd always felt it passively, like background music. Now she pulled on it, dragging it toward her with desperate intent. The bond blazed to life. Power flooded through her, not Philibert's power, but something that had always been hers, buried beneath years of believing she was invisible, worthless, nothing. Philibert reached the platform, and Rebecca felt the moment the bond stopped being a thread and became a chain, binding them together with unbreakable certainty. "She is not my weakness," Philibert thundered, his voice carrying supernatural authority as he stood between her and Blackthorn's sword. His blood dripped onto the platform, mixing with the stains of the past. "She is my strength, my equal, my choice." The bond detonated. Rebecca gasped as power pure, ancient, moonlit power erupted from where they stood. The ropes binding her wrists disintegrated. She rose to her feet, no longer trembling, no longer small. For the first time in her 23 years, the moon answered her call. Silver light poured from the sky despite the sun still hanging in the west. It wrapped around Rebecca and Philibert like a blessing, like recognition, like the universe itself was saying yes. These two, this bond, this truth. The Mate Council had been wrong. The moon didn't just choose alphas. She chose pairs. "Impossible," Blackthorn breathed, backing away from the platform as moonlight solidified into something almost tangible. A barrier of pure lunar magic that his warriors couldn't penetrate. Rebecca felt it then, the true nature of Omega power. Not submission, not weakness, but balance. The moon's other half. The anchor that turned an alpha's raw strength into something greater. She touched Philibert's bleeding shoulder, and her power flowed into him, healing, strengthening, completing. His wounds closed, his wolf steadied. Together, they were unstoppable. "You wanted to see weakness?" Philibert's voice resonated with double authority. Now his alpha dominance and Rebecca's Omega power combined. "This is what true strength looks like." He raised his hand, and the moonlight responded. It swept through the courtyard like a tidal wave, not harming but revealing. Every warrior touched by its glow fell to their knees, their weapons clattering to the stones, not through force, but through sudden, overwhelming understanding of what they'd almost destroyed. A true mate bond, the rarest gift the moon could give. Blackthorn alone remained standing, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You think this changes anything? The Mate Council will never accept." "The Mate Council is finished," a new voice announced. Captain Thorne rode through the fortress gates at the head of 200 loyal warriors, their weapons drawn, but their eyes wide with wonder at the moonlight still cascading around the platform. Behind them, in chains, came councillors Margrave and Voss. "We intercepted their confession," Captain Thorne continued, dismounting. "Everything. The coup plot, the bribery, the corruption of bonding laws dating back decades. Every alpha in the kingdom is hearing the truth right now." "You're too late," Philibert said, his hand finding Rebecca's. Their fingers interlaced, and the bond hummed with satisfaction. "We don't need their acceptance anymore." Rebecca looked at the man who'd given up his throne for her, who'd fought through impossible odds to reach her, who'd never once treated her like property or burden. "The world must change," she said quietly, her voice carrying with unexpected authority. "The laws, the council, everything that told Omegas we were less than, that bonds could be commanded, that love was weakness. It will," Philibert promised. "Together we'll rebuild it." "Together," Rebecca agreed. Blackthorn snarled and lunged for them one last time. The moonlight caught him mid-stride, lifting him off his feet and slamming him into the courtyard wall with enough force to crack stone. He slumped, unconscious, as his remaining warriors quickly surrendered. The battle was over, but as Rebecca stood on the execution platform, transformed into a victory stand, Philibert's hand warm in hers, and the moon's blessing still glowing around them, she knew the real fight was just beginning. A kingdom built on corrupt laws wouldn't change easily. The question was, would they break it to save it, or would it break them first? Chapter 8. Queen of the Once Invisible. The Mate Council's dissolution took exactly 3 days. Rebecca stood in the throne room beside Philibert as the formal decree was read aloud. All 7 council seats abolished, their authority revoked, their centuries-old laws subject to immediate review. Margrave and Voss would stand trial for treason. The remaining 5 councillors had resigned in disgrace. By royal decree, the court magistrate announced, bonding law is hereby reformed. No Omega, Beta, or Alpha shall be commanded into partnership against their will. The moon's gift is sacred. Choice is paramount. Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Shock, approval, resistance, mixing in equal measure. Rebecca felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. She wore a simple green dress, her hair unadorned, looking exactly like what she'd always been. An unranked Omega with no family, no political connections, no reason to be standing beside a king, except for the mate bond that still glowed faintly between them, visible to those who knew how to look. Furthermore, Philibert continued, his hand finding Rebecca's, the position of queen consort is abolished. Confused silence fell. Instead, he said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber, we establish the position of queen regent with full political authority, voting rights on all matters of state, and power to veto laws that harm the vulnerable. The crowd erupted. Your Majesty, this is unprecedented. Lord Chancellor Morrison sputtered. The consort position has existed for 300 years as a decorative role with no actual power, Rebecca interrupted quietly. Every head swiveled toward her. She'd barely spoken in these official proceedings, and her voice, though soft, somehow commanded attention. I've read the histories. Queens used to rule alongside kings as equals. The Mate Council changed that, just like they changed bonding laws, to consolidate their own authority. She's right, confirmed Lady Ashford, the kingdom's oldest living historian. The original coronation oaths bound both monarchs equally. Morrison's face purpled. You can't seriously intend to give an unranked Omega. I intend to give my mate, my equal, and the woman who saved my life the voice she deserves, Philibert said coldly. Anyone who objects can submit their resignation. No one moved. Good. Philibert turned to Rebecca, his expression softening. The question is whether you'll accept. Rebecca's heart hammered. A month ago, she'd been invisible, a night archivist. No one noticed. Now the king was offering her a crown and real power to change the laws that had oppressed her entire life. On one condition, she said. Philibert raised an eyebrow. Name it. The first law we reform gives all Omegas access to education. Reading, writing, history, everything currently restricted to ranked families. Rebecca's voice grew stronger. You can't give people choice if you keep them ignorant. Pride blazed in Philibert's eyes. Done. Then yes, Rebecca said. I accept. The coronation took place under the full moon 3 weeks later. Rebecca knelt before the ancient altar, where generations of moonfall rulers had been crowned. But this time, 2 crowns waited. Philibert placed the silver circlet on her head himself, his hands steady, his voice ringing with conviction. I crown you, Rebecca Thorne, Queen Regent of Moonfall, not through my authority, but through your own merit, wisdom, and strength. When she rose, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was queen. The feast afterward lasted until dawn, but halfway through, Philibert leaned close to her ear. Want to escape? Rebecca had never wanted anything more. They slipped away from the celebration, 2 monarchs abandoning their own coronation feast to walk through moonlit corridors toward the royal library, the same library where they'd first met, where the bond had snapped into place and changed everything. The restricted archives were unsealed now by Rebecca's order, knowledge freed for anyone who sought it. She ran her fingers along the genealogy shelves, remembering the terrified girl who'd hidden here, clutching stolen scrolls and believing she was about to die. "I was so scared that night," she admitted softly. Philibert came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I was terrified too. The bond felt like losing control, like becoming something I didn't understand. And now I understand that control was an illusion." He turned her to face him, his amber eyes warm in the candlelight. "I ruled alone for years, Rebecca. Made decisions, enforced laws, tried to be the perfect king, but I rule better beside you. You see the things I miss. You question the things I accept. You make me better." Rebecca touched his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "You made me visible. You made me believe I mattered. You always mattered." Philibert kissed her softly, reverently. The world just needed to catch up. They stood together in the quiet library, surrounded by the histories they'd already changed and the futures they'd yet to write. "The nobility is going to fight every reform," Rebecca said eventually. "Probably. Half the kingdom thinks I bewitched you. Let them think what they want. And the other kingdoms will see Omega equality as weakness. Then we'll prove them wrong." Philibert pulled her closer. Together, Rebecca smiled against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, feeling the bond pulse between them with contentment and promise. Outside the library windows, dawn began to break over. Moonfall, the first sunrise of a new era. The Mate Council was gone. Omegas had voice. And the invisible girl who'd hidden in shadows now wore a crown and the power to reshape her world. But as Rebecca looked at the mountains of work ahead, laws to rewrite, minds to change, a kingdom to heal, she knew this was just the beginning. Change wouldn't come easy. Some battles had been won, but others were just starting. The question was no longer whether she was strong enough to stand beside a king. The question was whether the kingdom was ready for a queen who refused to be silent. "What are you thinking?" Philibert murmured. Rebecca looked up at him, her mate, her partner, her choice, and smiled. "I'm thinking," she said, "that we have a lot of work to do." "Good thing we have forever," Philibert replied. The bond blazed agreement between them. Forever sounded perfect. Chapter 9. Chosen, not hidden. 6 months after the coronation, Rebecca stood in the Great Hall watching history rewrite itself. The first class of Omega scholars presented their research essays on law, medicine, agriculture, philosophy, topics they'd never been allowed to study before. Knowledge, they'd been told, was too complex for their simple minds. Every single presentation was brilliant. Rebecca caught Philibert's eye across the hall, and he smiled with the particular warmth he reserved only for her. 6 months of marriage, and that smile still made her heart stumble. "Your Majesty," a young Omega girl no more than 16 approached hesitantly. May I ask you something?" "Of course." Rebecca knelt so they were eye level, something that still surprised visiting dignitaries but had become her habit. Queens didn't need to tower over their people to command respect. "They say you were invisible once," the girl whispered. "Is that true?" Rebecca's throat tightened with recognition. She saw herself in this girl's uncertain posture, in the way she made herself small, in the disbelief that she deserved space in the world. "Yes," Rebecca said gently. "For most of my life I believed I didn't matter, that people like us were meant to endure, not to dream." "What changed?" Rebecca considered the question. The easy answer was Philibert, the mate bond, the coronation, the power that came with his love. But that wasn't quite right. "I learned that invisibility was never about me," she said finally. "It was about a system designed to keep certain people unseen. And once I understood that, I realized I had a choice: stay hidden or demand to be recognized." The girl's eyes widened. "You chose." "I chose," Rebecca confirmed. And now, because of that choice, you get to choose too. What you study, who you love, what kind of life you want to build. She squeezed the girl's hand. Never let anyone convince you that you're invisible. You're standing right here. You matter. The girl left with tears in her eyes and a straighter spine. Philibert materialized at Rebecca's side moments later. You're remarkable. You know that? I'm just talking to people. You're changing lives with every conversation. He offered his arm. Walk with me. They slipped away from the presentations, nodding to guards who no longer looked surprised when their monarchs abandoned formal events for private moments. It had become something of a pattern, Philibert and Rebecca, escaping the weight of crowns to remember they were also just two people who'd found each other in the darkness. The royal gardens had transformed under Rebecca's influence. Where once only ornamental flowers grew, now medicinal herbs flourished alongside vegetables meant for the city's soup kitchens. Beauty and purpose intertwined. The Northern Territories formally recognized the new bonding laws today, Philibert said as they walked. That's all 7 regions now. Any resistance? Nothing violent. Some grumbling from traditionalists, but even they can't argue with the results. Crime is down. Omega satisfaction surveys are up. Forced separations have stopped entirely. He pulled her closer. You were right about everything. We were right, Rebecca corrected. This was never just me. They reached the center of the garden where a fountain depicting the moon goddess stood. Philibert had commissioned it 3 months ago, a gift for Rebecca's first birthday as queen. The goddess's face bore a striking resemblance to Rebecca herself, though she'd protested the vanity. I have something for you, Philibert said. Another gift? You just rebuilt the entire library. This is different. He drew a folded document from his jacket. Open it. Rebecca unfolded the parchment, and her breath caught. It was an official royal decree, signed and sealed, establishing the Rebecca Thorne Foundation for Omega Education, a permanent endowment that would fund scholarships for unranked Omegas in perpetuity. Your name will outlive us both, Philibert said softly. Every Omega who reads, who learns, who chooses their own path, they'll know who fought for that right. Rebecca's eyes burned with tears. Philibert, I choose you, he interrupted, taking both her hands. I chose you in that library when the bond formed. I chose you at Ironwood when they demanded my throne. I choose you now, tomorrow, and every day after. Not because the moon commanded it, but because you're the best choice I've ever made. I choose you too, Rebecca whispered. Always. He kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promise. The bond hummed between them, not commanding, not controlling, but celebrating. 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from it. When they pulled apart, the moon was rising over the garden, full and bright. Do you ever think about that night in the archives? Rebecca asked. How terrified I was. Do you ever regret it? Any of this? Rebecca looked at the palace where Omega scholars studied freely, at the city beyond where forced bonds had become history, at the man beside her who'd given up everything to prove she mattered. Not for a single moment, she said. They stood together in the moonlight, a king who'd learned that true strength meant sharing power, and a queen who'd discovered that visibility was something you claimed, not something granted. Rebecca thought about the girl she'd been hiding in shadows, believing herself worthless, apologizing for existing. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd rewritten laws, challenged tradition, and proven that the moon's choices were wiser than any council's commands. The invisible Omega had become a queen, but more than that, she'd become herself. Rebecca looked up at Philibert, at the life they'd built together, at the future still unfolding before them like an unwritten story. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For seeing me. Philibert smiled and pulled her close. You were always there, Rebecca. The world just needed to learn how to look. As they walked back toward the palace hand in hand, their crowns glinting in the moonlight, their bond blazing steady and true, Rebecca finally understood the truth she'd spent her whole life missing. She was never invisible. She was just waiting to be seen. If this moonlit love story stirred something in you, Subscribe and let the moon guide you back. The end.